Thank you, everybody, and welcome to the International Open Data Day. We're presenting, we as Good Go Open Data Association are providing two stories. One is Open Data 101 for both newbies as well as those who are already in there, just as a refresher on the information you may or should have an interest in. So just moving on then, my name is Yuri Konga. I'm the Executive Director of the Go Open Data Association, and I'll be acting as your host for this session. We're going to start off with the Open Data 101 video. It's about 20 minutes long, and then we could follow up with a couple of questions. We probably won't get to all of the questions, but certainly we'll try to answer a couple of them. And following that, we have Open Data on AI, which promises to be a pretty exciting discussion. And then some QA after that, whatever we have time for. Without further ado, I'm going to move into the video.
Welcome to Open Data 101, presented by the Go Open Data Association in collaboration with the Canadian Open Data Society. There are official definitions of open data, which we'll get into later, but we thought it would be more practical to start with some context, which we find in this video from the county of Grande Prairie, Alberta.
The County of Grande Prairie has joined governments across the world who are opening their files and unlocking their hard drives, unleashing the potential of open data. This open information is changing the way people work, make day-to-day decisions, and solve problems. Open data takes information that the government has been collecting for its own use for years and makes it available for anyone to use. The data is uploaded to an online data catalog and is free and accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As always, sensitive information or information subject to confidentiality and privacy legislation will remain private and secure. Most of us think of data as just numbers, statistics, and spreadsheets. But data is our day-to-day experiences, what goes on around us in our homes, on our farms, in our communities, and across the world. We can take that information and use it as it is, slice it and dice it into a format we find useful, or even combine publicly available data with private data and create something completely new and useful. Open data makes our governments more transparent and accountable. But just as important, it makes it easier for citizens to communicate with government and with each other. That leads to collaboration and cooperation. People become more informed and engaged. Businesses can save time and make smarter decisions. Around the world, open data is being used in a number of creative ways, simplifying tasks people do every day. Here's some examples being used. A smartphone application to find the nearest walk-in clinic, pharmacy, or emergency department. In just one tap, you can view the location, the hours, and even the services the clinic offers. You can even access a one-stop source of highway construction information, which is used to help commuters find alternate routes around construction zones. And these are only a few of the endless possibilities for open data. Open data is a powerful, innovative concept that allows easy access of information to citizens in order to build better workforces, better communities, and a better society. Open data, making the County of Grande Prairie and you partners in growth and innovation.
Now let's dive into some basics about data and open data. This pyramid illustrates the relationships among data, information, and knowledge. From the bottom to the top, you can see that data is basically facts and figures which relay something specific, but they're not organized in any way. Moving up to information, that's contextualized, categorized, calculated, and condensed data, which leads to knowledge, the know-how, understanding, experience, insight, intuition, and contextualized information. You might say data is like atoms of information. Information is what you get from data by applying process to it, and knowledge is the understanding or insight you get from information by drawing a conclusion from it. Digital data versus information for the public. There is a distinction between data for computers and for people. Data in a digital form works for computer programs, but not for people. We can't read code easily. There are two kinds of data, quantitative and qualitative. You can use numbers to describe quantitative, things like counts, measurements, coordinates. Qualitative, you can't count it, but you can observe and record it, colors, shapes, textures, jurisdictions, etc. Now examples, counting how many votes, that's quantitative. But votes for a party or in a poll area, that's qualitative. In addition to types of data, we need to understand that there is a data spectrum, as defined by the UK's Open Data Institute, or ODI. Now that runs from being closed data to shared data to open data. The spectrum also notes that data can differ in size, small, medium to big data, and also classes of data, personal, commercial, and government data. Closed data is typically related to internal confidential data, some of which may be shared, for example, sales reports, but only with internal access. There is some overlap into shared data via named access, such as providing access to a Google spreadsheet. Shared data has a number of variations which overlaps into both closed, as I just mentioned, and open data. The sharing can happen via group-based access to data, for example, medical research data, some sharing for COVID-19. Sharing can also happen via public access to data and information, such as a Twitter feed that links to a file. But open data, that's the ultimate, most desired endgame for the data spectrum. Open data defined. So, what is open data? The often referenced definition is provided by the Open Knowledge Foundation. Open data and content can be freely used, modified, and shared by anyone for any purpose. This is the succinct definition. But let's expand a bit here. Open data is also viewed as being timely and comprehensive digital data that can be freely accessed, used, reused, shared, mixed, and built on by anyone, anywhere, anytime, for any purpose. Open data is free, both in the technical sense, for example, not limited to one type of software that can read it, and the legal sense, not costing anything, and you're told you can mash it up with other data. You can republish it, interpret it in any way, for commercial, political, or other purposes. Now, what is the framework for open data? Let's take a look at the core principles of open data. The principles for open data have gone through an evolution over the years and now landed on 6 principles that were developed via the community and the International Open Data Charter, who are the curators for the principles as well as leading open data-related initiatives. Here's our attempt at describing the principles in layperson's terms. Open by default. As the name implies, it states that all government data should be available and open to access. There are exceptions to this rule, such as personal information and security data. The open by default principle is often the cornerstone of open data, open government policy. Timely and comprehensive. This principle speaks to the value proposition for the effective use of open data. In most cases, if the data is not current or the dataset coverage not complete, the ability to use the data may be greatly diminished. Accessible and usable. For open data, accessibility is an imperative. This means the data must be easily found, for example, in an open data portal versus being scattered across several web pages. And it needs to be easily accessed. To be usable, open data needs to be digital and machine readable in common formats, for example, CSV files, not a PDF. In addition, the data must have open data licensing that allows it to be used without restrictions. Comparable and interoperable. The principle speaks to the need to compare data and to have the ability of systems and software to exchange data. To be most effective and useful, data should be easy to compare within and between sectors, across geographic locations, and over time. To be able to exchange and or combine data, there is a need to have data standards in place. Challenges include trying to combine data sets with differing formats, such as the date. One set has year, month, day. The other set has day, month, year. For improved governance and citizen engagement, open data has the capacity to let citizens and others in government have a better idea of what officials and politicians are doing. This transparency can improve public services and help hold governments to account. Open data provides opportunities for enhanced and meaningful citizen engagement, for example, hackathons, which we'll discuss later. For inclusive development and innovation. Finally, open data can help spur inclusive economic development. For example, greater access to data can make farming more efficient, or it can be used to tackle climate change. We often think of open data as just about improving government performance, but there's a whole universe out there of entrepreneurs making money off the back of open data. These principles may appear to be overwhelming, but Rome wasn't built in a day, and implementing these principles cannot be done in a day either. Rather, they are implemented incrementally through changing data collection, data maintenance, and data archiving. There are also some overarching principles, such as the open government principles of transparency, accountability, and being participatory. The open data principles align with the broader open government principles. The Ontario Information and Privacy Commissioner's Office, or IPC, provides a key framework for transparency via their Access by Design document and also their important Privacy by Design principles. All levels of government typically will have someone responsible for providing access to information and managing the Freedom of Information, or FOI, process, and a different person to manage the privacy aspects of providing data. For example, must not release personally identifiable data. The personal data graphic illustrates some examples of personally identifiable data, including your name, address, health conditions, income, cultural profile. However, this type of information is available from agencies such as Statistics Canada in an aggregated form, so no individual can be identified. How to find access? Well, one of the greatest values of open data is actually discovering data and accessing it through your own organization's open data portal. Most people don't know what their organization has, and in the old days, you needed to jump through hoops and sign a data sharing agreement with the department you were getting it from. And often the data was in a format that you couldn't use. Now we have consistent data sharing licenses that most public sector organizations use, and you'll find most open data portals have a number of standard data formats, such as the CSV files I mentioned earlier. Today, it's still awkward to find thematic data, for example, environmental data, which can reside in 4 levels of government portals and associated agencies, such as conservation authorities and civil society groups. To address this, what's coming in the next few years is a federated data search. So you'll be able to search the combined open data portals across Canada and potentially international data from organizations such as the United Nations and the European Union. Open Data Access, Ontario's data authority. This is simply an FYI to keep you current on what's happening related to data access in Ontario. The Ontario Digital Service is exploring what an open data authority might look like and what it could do. The graphics here are 2 slides from their August 25, 2021 consultation webinar. The initiatives seek to increase access to high-value government data, improve data infrastructure, ensure privacy and transparency, and promote equity and accessibility. It's notable that at this stage, just starting, they state that the data authority will not share personal data, identify you, compromise the safety of your information, or collect additional information about you. This is something that we should follow to see where it goes and how it might benefit our organizations. Open data outcomes in our everyday lives. Open Day started as an initiative of civil society, promoting access to government data, thereby promoting transparency. One perceived benefit was to ease freedom of information requests for routine inquiries. Here's some added examples where open data is put to work. Weather forecasting, transit data for ride scheduling apps on mobile phones. And there's more. Genealogy and cemetery data, election voting, turnout, expense, and donor data, scientific observations like counting crows, neighborhood observations like noise data, government budgets and programs. The Open Government Partnership includes 78 nations, Canada is one, and 76 subnationals, Ontario is one, as members. But now everyone can publish open data. Private businesses, Google, GitHub, Uber, and others have opened selected data sets. Nonprofits and charities, notably FundTracker by Aja, a Montreal company, uses and generates open data on corporate and charitable grants and donations. Scientists. The publication of open science data actually began in 1957 to allow the verification of scientific claims by allowing others to look at the reproducibility of results and to allow data from many sources to be integrated to give new knowledge. Famously, the human genome is open data, and there's an open data consortium for geospatial data. From a citizen's view, Barcelona comprehensively reversed the usual unconsented flow of data permissions from citizens to corporations and governments. They are leading a group of fearless cities worldwide enacting similar principles. Real-world experience. In looking at the real world of the open data ecosystem, there are a couple of areas that stand out. Collaboration and sharing among stakeholders. The Niagara Area and Municipalities and Region Open Data Portal, or the Ontario Public Sector Open Data, PSOD. This is a collaborative with municipal representatives and a good member as co-chairs. The move towards data and process standardization. Examples, the Standards Council of Canada Data Governance Standardization, or Municipal Information Systems, the Association Pilot Project on Open Data Standards. And finally, community engagement. The best example here are the many in-person and virtual hackathons happening frequently around the world. Complexities. Reality checks. We felt it was important to do a reality check on open data, especially with the public sector where most open data lives. Government is often portrayed as being bureaucratic with a corporate culture that is resistant to change. This characterization can vary greatly among organizations, but getting buy-in to something new will always require a business case, illustrating the value to both the organization and the people they serve. One of the often used arguments for moving forward with open data relates to the larger principles of open government, being transparent, accountable, and being participatory, which all politicians can agree on as being important for public service. There is also a strong case for moving forward by referencing the fact that open government and open data has become the norm in many organizations, which likely includes some neighboring jurisdictions. This is also true from a thematic or departmental perspective, where making their data open has enhanced internal processes and service delivery. Certainly, Rome wasn't built in a day. And we say again, neither is open data. There is a process that typically involves developing policy, preparing data for publication, designing and creating an open data portal, undertaking community engagement, and maintaining all aspects of an open data program. This can be done incrementally, by starting small and scaling as resources allow. For those starting out, it's beneficial to tap into the open data community to learn from those who've gone through this and leverage their best practices. The early days of open data saw the initiative being done off the side of the desk from dedicated people who believed in the value of open data. Today, it's important to recognize that there should be a plan to resource the development and maintenance of an open data program. You may wish to use a pilot project to help build the business for a proposed program together with a resource plan that should include an open data steering coordinating committee, an open data lead, and also a department, departmental leads, and any external resources support. Bottom line, your open data initiative will be limited to your organization's capacity. Having said that, open data has the potential to create improved internal processes, which offsets the need for new resources and reallocates resources to different tasks. This can vary significantly depending on your organization's current state. It's doable, and many have gone before you. Open data community, local to global. The open government and open data community has grown significantly since its beginnings in 2008. Aspects like data sharing has been going on much earlier than that. We've noted a sampling of nonprofits from local, like the Go Open Data Association, to national, like the Canadian Open Data Society, and longtime open data advocates and researchers, such as Open North and the Governance Lab from NYU, which Good also collaborates with. At the global level, we have the International Open Data Charter, which Good is a supporting institution, and the Open Government Partnership, which began with 8 members in 2011, with President Obama as co-chair, and now has 78 members. These organizations and many related organizations provide information that assists with developing a policy framework, operational guidelines, and ongoing research. And there is open knowledge in the Open Data Institute in the UK. These are all a small sampling of a much larger community that you can tap into. In Canada, there is a collaboration at all levels of government, including the Federal Provincial Coordinating Committee. A provincial example is the previously mentioned PSOD, Public Sector Open Data Collaborative. Local collaboratives include Niagara Open Data, which includes 13 municipalities and school boards. And there is the West Parry Sound Geography Network, providing shared services of GIS and open data for 7 local communities. As open data has matured, there has been an increase in community events. With Good and CODS, there are typically monthly events, such as our Good Cafes and webinars, in addition to the annual conferences held by both organizations, Good in the spring and CODS in the fall. One notable type of community event is called a hackathon, not to be confused with the bad people that hack us. No, hackathons bring together people in the community and are open to everyone to participate in a challenge that addresses a community need. Now, you don't need to be a programmer to create an app. It could be about defining principles, creating a framework for policy, or simply researching the topic to recommend next steps. There are a wealth of opportunities to get involved and to expand your network that can assist you with your open data initiative. Open data resources. For those who are new to open data, there are many resources that you can leverage on your own and a community with groups that you can contact to help you begin your open data initiative. We've noted both Good and CODS providing some resources, while other nonprofits such as Open North, GovLab, the Open Knowledge Foundation, and the Open Data Institute have numerous resources and initiatives underway, together with government resources such as the Federal Do-It-Yourself Toolkit, the Ontario Government Open Government website, and a variety of resources from the local level, such as Toronto's Open Data Master Plan and other municipal plans. Open data, is it for you? After all we've talked about in the prior slides, you may be asking yourself whether open data is for you. So here's a few scenarios that might help you decide on the relevance of an open data program. Repetitive data requests. We know that many different types of data are constantly requested by internal and external clients. Requests such as zoning bylaw boundaries, building permit status, COVID-19 statistics, flood plan boundaries, budget data. It's been found that in these types of circumstances, there are efficiencies in creating a process that makes the data available as open data that both internal and external users can access via standard open data license. Data for operational needs. It's been discovered that sometimes different departments will go to external resources to acquire data for their operational and project needs, often at considerable costs, while not realizing that the same data is available within their organization. Many organizations don't have a comprehensive inventory of the data that exists. Lots of data is in silos, and there is little data knowledge sharing. Often you hear, "I don't know, someone else could use our data." Open data addresses this scenario. Value proposition for data collection. Every organization is structured by operational functions, for example, finance, IT, planning, engineering. Over time, these departments or divisions have developed processes for their mandate and collected the data that supports planning and day-to-day operations. The cost of data collection and maintenance is substantial. It's been shown that making your data available as open data also fosters innovation, with entrepreneurs creating apps or services that were never previously considered for that data. This creates an economic development opportunity. So, is open data for you? At minimum, you owe it to yourself to research the potential benefits of open data to your organization and to your citizens and stakeholders. You may already have open data operating in your organization or have a policy mandate to undertake open data. So reach out to those who have been down this road and create a plan that suits your organization with appreciation of the capacity to undertake this program. This presentation was visualized and written by Yuri Konga. I'm Keith McDonald, producer and narrator. For more information, go to goopendata.ca.
Okay, so we're back, and if you have any questions, please start with the letter Q and followed by the question and put it in the chat. If you can't think of anything right now, or would like to have more detailed discussion possibly, you can connect with us at connect at goopendata.ca. So if there are, and I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, which is fine. I know that was a lot of information. So what we have next on the agenda is a discussion around AI. I know AI is just everywhere these days. You can't get away without seeing an article or reading articles all the time. So that being the case, we thought it was appropriate to talk about AI and open data on this International Open Data Day. What I'd like to do is to, first of all, introduce the two people that will be discussing AI. That's firstly Keith McDonald, and Keith's degree is in communications with a long career converting complex issues into understandable and actionable information bites. A mentored presentation specialist and speaker coach. Keith's early background in teaching revealed a delightful talent for entertaining while encouraging critical thinking and inspiring others to adapt to change. He's worked with TVO Ontario, Centennial College, City of Toronto, the Go Open Data Association, Greenpeace, UNICEF, Toronto Public Library, and other private businesses. He founded the LiteracyAI project in 2018 to curate, unpack, ponder, and provide workshops in artificial intelligence issues for non-practitioner audiences, including parents, teachers, students, and seniors. And we also welcome Ushnish Sengupta, who is a director with the Go Open Data Board of Directors, and he is the assistant professor at the university, or the Algoma University. And so without further ado, I think we'll get right into it. And possibly just to provide some context, maybe I could ask Keith, can you provide a kind of generic or high level definition of AI for us, please?
Yeah, sure. Pleasure. Nice to be here. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I think people are still getting a little confused, maybe, because AI, as you said, Yuri, seems to be everywhere, and it is a bit of a catch-all for a number of things. I think the best way to consider it is what we're really seeing now is what they call narrow artificial intelligence, which means it's good at something very, very specific. We're moving towards something called general AI intelligence, which is going to be far more flexible and, if you like, independent. So that causes some confusion, but bits and pieces of what is artificial intelligence technology is found in so many things, from the apps that you use to websites that you visit to stores that you're dealing with in terms of how they're collecting data and finding information about you through cash registers and things like that. So when we say it's all encompassing, that's really what we mean. And it's been around for a long time, but the exponential nature of its development is really huge. In fact, I've seen people now calling it the fire hose of AI, as if we've just unleashed the tap and it's flooding. And I think recently ChatGPT, or GPTs, as I call it, has really hit the marketplace, affected businesses to just citizens as well, in terms of what is this tool? What does it mean? People are complaining about it. You can cheat now on exams and all kinds of different things. I think it's one of the most recent examples of how AI can creep in suddenly and all of a sudden change the dynamic. So think back when the iPhone came out, and even Twitter. It's the same kind of situation we're in right now. I think the problem we have, though, is understanding what it is we're up against. So just remember this idea of narrow. It's still narrow. That is, it's very good. It's something very, very specific, but it can't really do anything else. We're moving towards a general, and even as far as separate consciousness for AI, which is still a long ways away.
Great. Thanks for that. That's really great context. Now, one of the things I'm particularly interested in, and it's around data, which then moves into the information realm. the old adage of garbage in, garbage out. I'm really concerned about how does AI, for example, ChatGPT, assess the validity or the authoritative source of data and information that it's using. Ushnish, maybe we'll start with you. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so ChatGPT doesn't assess the validity of its information. It's a statistical model, right? So it says, how many times does this word or this phrase or this sentence show up based on the prompt you're using, right? And kind of replies back with that summary. So it doesn't have any of those concepts of this item is more valid than another, which is why you will see the word hallucination used very often when people are discussing ChatGPT, because it creates things like references. If you say, hey, create a news article for me on the advances in open data in the last 10 years, and it'll create a nicely written article for you. And then you say, add some references to me at the bottom, and it'll add some references which look real, but when you actually check those references, you will find they are not real references most of the time. Sometimes it'll throw in a real one because it can find it statistically. There's one that exists that's mentioned often enough, right? So I'll try and I'll try and multitask a little bit. I'll try and stick in some of these examples in the chat. So this is an example of where somebody said, hey, I used ChatGPT to create this article and create this reference. Did you write this? And the guy's like, no, I didn't write this, right? This is not an article I wrote. Yes, my name is there and there's an article title and there's a date, but I didn't write this. So that's one of the issues with ChatGPT. I know there's a lot of people from government here, from municipal governments, and there's like that temptation, especially in the communications department, to use ChatGPT or experiment with it to push things out, because it saves time, right? Saves time, saves money, saves resources. So all those are good things, but like you might be pushing out a lot of wrong information. Like the biggest example so far, the biggest fail in that department is, I'll post another link, CNET, which is like a aggregator for all kinds of information, pushes out these articles, right? And it pushed out a bunch of articles which had like the math completely wrong, and the concepts, more importantly, the concepts of mortgages and what constitutes principal with a mortgage and interest with a mortgage, completely wrong, right? And they pushed it out in the public without like verifying it, validating it, a human being looking through it. So that's a huge reputational risk to a private company like CNET, but also any government institution that's maybe is already maybe experimenting with this. So I'll stop there and hand it over to Keith.
Yeah, I'd like to add that it's not original and it's not current. For instance, it doesn't know that Lisa Marie Presley died recently. It knows that Tom Petty died because it's backing from where its kickoff point is. So if we were in a different century, it would be identifying the world as flat, for example. So they've got to advance, I guess, the ability to be current, and that's probably coming without a doubt. But I think our reliance on this, or at least what I'm seeing as the initial reliance on it, seems to be what I call lazy. As a creator myself, I can use it as an idea generator. I could use it as a collaborator even. But if I want to put my name on as an author, I really have to do some hard work. And all the communications people that I know of seem to be jumping on the bandwagon more as a test, I think. I think they're starting to realize, yeah, this isn't necessarily authorship, or it's not really going to save me a lot of time. I still have to edit it, as Ushnish said that, identifying the sources and those kind of things. But I find it remarkable, as I said right at the start, that everybody seems to be into this, and it's like a tidal wave of enthusiasm for it. And I do think we have to be very careful for how we look at it in terms of its reliability and its truth. And those are the risks, I think, about not really understanding AI. And what Yuri asked about the idea of garbage in, I think is relative here. Because the internet, as we know, is full of garbage, as it is full of valuable information. And the tool itself isn't maybe sharp enough yet to sort the garbage from the really good stuff. And that's, again, where human has to come in and evaluate. So I use the word AI literacy quite profoundly in these kind of situations. We have to recognize we still have to be smart enough to assess and not believe ChatGPTs or anything else on the internet without doing a bit of research ourselves. And also wanted to identify for Yuri, right, the theme of Open Data Week really is talking about AI and connectivity between open data, which I find fascinating because what we're starting to see is a lot of AI talk that's very reminiscent of the open data talk. And in some of the other things I was involved in with Go Open Data, right, we talked about open data being the cool kids back in the day. This would be 2009, 10, and so on. Where really now AI is the cool kids. So it's not surprising for me to see some of the exact same language. Releasing your data, it's good, transparency, and so on. For AI, using your data for AI and being transparent with it is good. So there's a real parallel here, I think, between the two initiatives. And I think the challenges are exactly the same. How can you be transparent if you're proprietary? So OpenAI, which is the creator of the ChatGPT, has a very interesting name, doesn't it? As OpenAI. Are they truly open or not? They've been around for a long time, by the way, and they're getting lots of support to the tune of billions and billions of dollars, as are other companies that are competing with their product. But is it truly open? And how far can they go with transparency? And I think our experience with the open data movement could be very helpful to AI developers in navigating those waters, because the main risks we're seeing in AI, I believe, are the idea of closed shops that are creating boxes that we have no means of understanding why they're making decisions. We have no means to counter those decisions. So think in simple terms of your insurance being denied or loans being denied. Or acceptance to jobs and schools and so on, all being based on black box decision making that we have no access to as users, citizens, to how did they make those decisions? What went into those decisions? And to your original question, Yuri, about the garbage in, how biased are the products that they're creating? Are they assuming that you need a certain amount of education to get into an institution, or would mature learning be relevant to that? Do they just close that off completely so someone who has a great deal of live, real experience is excluded? Those are just a couple of quick examples, I think, of the dangers and where open data can collide with AI, and hopefully be a good model for them is to recognize the more we know, the more we can trust it. And trust is a whole other issue we could talk about for sure, because there is, as we know, lots of mistrust toward government, toward AI, even towards data, right? So I think we've got big challenges ahead for us. And I think it's very interesting that the powers that be chose that theme this year to bring up AI and open data together.
Thanks, Keith. And Ushnish, really good points there. There was a comment that came up on the chat from Eugene talking about ChatGPT does train on the outputs, which can help with validating the accuracy of the output and for identifying what sources are authoritative. What kind of experience have you had, thinking around the learning for accuracy, because that ultimately is extremely important when we're looking at whether or not there's something that we want to trust. So any specific thoughts on that?
I used it recently to write a speech, and I asked it to write in the style of Obama, AOC, a couple of other approaches, and it was fairly accurate in terms of it really did have the flavor of those speakers. Now, that wasn't assessing facts per se, but I thought it was an interesting exercise to go through. And I just think, it has to be something that we have to recognize as users, that if you're going to be, let's say, speaking in front of a large group, quoting facts and figures, you really do need to identify sources, check the sources. That's probably going to improve on the tool itself. And in fact, some of the competition is working on those very things to improve or compete, I guess. But yeah, to the basic question, I think what's fun about it right now is that kind of experiment. I also asked it to write a profile for myself, and it was surprisingly close. So I exist on the internet in some form, and it was able to pull some things. So I found that fascinating too. It's quite surprising how deep it can go, but it's also surprising, as Ushnish is saying, that how inaccurate it can be too. So you really have to be careful, and I'd call that your ChatGPT literacy, of understanding right now the tool is still in its infancy. which is interesting too that they launched this. You mentioned, Ushnish, that sometimes they put products out without it being tested. They had other versions of it, which they pulled back. One was pulled back completely because they felt it was a bit too dark. It was a couple of years ago now. But in this occasion, they thought it was ready to go, prime time. Yet they announced, this is OpenAI, that it's not perfect. You're going to have some of these problems. They've worked on some of the negatives that have been coming about with it. And so I think it's interesting because here's an example, I think, of the tech industry kind of working with audiences and identifying some of what they see as failures or bugs. Not every tech company does that. And I do blame Apple for it, by the way. It used to be user testing what happened before they do a release. Apple seemed to start just doing upgrades and updates and letting the community find bugs. And in many cases, people would download the new version and their phone would stop working and stuff. And I think that's a change that developed and crept into the tech industry around the time the iPhone started to come out. And it hasn't gone back. So there isn't that much user testing. What we're seeing with ChatGPT, however, is a lot of user testing. They are grabbing all kinds of data from everybody using it. Not only that, Microsoft and the attachment with Bing around this product, you do have to sign in to Bing. And if you want to request access to it, you have to give them your email and so on. So where's the privacy in that, right? I feel that we just need to be wise consumers of these things and decide how we want to use it, and be very aware that if we are going to use it, and we would be liable then if we're using that information, presenting it under my name, for example, if it's inaccurate, that could be very dangerous as an executive or something like that. Using it in that fashion could be very, very risky.
Yeah, I've got another.
I'm not sure
Sorry,
that
Keith.
answered the question, but
Yeah. So I have another question here because most of the audience is from the municipal sector, municipal government sector. And just wondering, the fact is that there's been a lot of quote AI that's existed in applications that are being used by municipalities right now. A lot of algorithms, coming up with proposing decisions and doing analyses. I guess one of the things that I'm sure the people, are thinking about is what should be considered as best practices for municipalities' use of new AI generative apps, and what are the ethical impacts of AI. And maybe I can throw that one to Ushnish to start that discussion.
Yeah, as Keith was mentioning, so one of the things, if you're going to put out content on your blogs, newsletters, government website that either fully or partially, utilize ChatGPT to create it. If there's misinformation in there, you're liable for it. Isn't like you cannot point the finger somewhere else. So again, that requires a huge amount of human intervention, checking. So if you're going to do all that work and intervention and checking, then might as well write the post by yourself, right? There may be one example I'll stick into the chat again is Vanderbilt University. So they put out this news release saying, hey, we really care about this incident that happened. And they attributed it saying, hey, we use AI to write this. So the issue was, so if you really, really care about this incident, why are you taking this shortcut using ChatGPT to write it? If you really, really cared about it, then you would write it. You would take the time, put in the resource, put in the time to write that press release. Because you use ChatGPT, essentially demonstrates you didn't care, right? So those are the risks for government institutions, like the risk of misinformation. And if it's not misinformation, it's like demonstrating to citizens that you don't care about an issue by using AI to generate the content which you and publish it, right? Back to your question, is to kind of for municipal employees, governments to educate themselves. Don't wait for the training to be, brought down, top down. Identify those risks that are relevant to your particular area. There's a lot of hype, as Keith was mentioning, a lot of kind of those positive stories. I'm pointing out some of these, negative stories that don't get that hype, right? Don't get as many mentions, tweets, likes, so it maybe doesn't show up on your timelines, right? So that's something to be aware of. And the other things, we've been here before with Clearview AI, like dozens of law enforcement agencies across Canada experimented with Clearview AI. Did any of them identify the risks? Did any of them say, look, yeah, it might make our job easier and it's a free pilot right now, but there's some issues with facial recognition, with bias, identifying people of different genders, people of different races. No law enforcement agency identified this risk, or at least explicitly, or kind of stopped that pilot, right? Until the Privacy Commissioner of Canada comes down with the big hammer and says, stop this. This is wrong. You cannot use this software, right? So I think a lot of either individual employees or maybe even departments or maybe even governments are in that mode of, hey, let's pilot with it, with this, let's play with it, let's see what it does. And I'm seeing a whole parallel to Clearview AI, right? And it's experimentation without understanding the risk. It's experimentation without investing like 5 minutes of your time in investigating the risks, right? So that's something I would hire. Investigate the risk. It's an investment of time. Absolutely. It takes that 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever, hours, days to investigate those risks. But it's a worthwhile investment of time before you end up becoming a news story, right? Before your government or your organization becomes a negative news story.
I think that's very true. And the idea of investment sometimes is not available to people. They just don't want to have the time. They haven't got the time. They're not given the time. This is where I do believe communications departments in cities can be quite helpful. They should be on it. They should be investigating it. They should be looking at it from a view of how can staff use this? How would we train staff to use that? Interesting enough, a lot of PR companies and so on are on the bandwagon of providing how you use these tools. So they're making money that way right now. You can hire oodles of companies to say, this is how you use ChatGPT. And to me, I go back to your comment of lazy. That's the fundamental question, I think, is why? Why are we doing this? Not only in text forms, but videos are being created through AI, music. In fact, very soon you'll be able to do everything through AI. Now, will SO or whoever is advertising have a little fine print? This ad was completely generated through AI, from writing to production to post-production. I'm not sure how people would feel about not knowing. Maybe it doesn't matter in the context of a commercial, but what about, your information source? Do we want to know it's from an AI, or does it not matter? I'll give you a quick example where a phone support line was using AI to answer questions. There was humans there on the phone line, but they were actually looking up answers. And they did a study afterwards. Clients felt the people on the phone were quite nice and quite professional and had good answers for them. When it was identified that those people were using AI, they had a completely different perspective on it. I think our maturity, though, when it comes to AI has got to change a bit, because it's here, folks. It's already happening. But the question is why? Why are we using AI? Is it to provide a better answer, or is it because we're lazy? Where are those answers coming from? Who put the basic information in? Quick analogy, though, is between places like 311. They have binders and resources that are very similar if you think about it. But rather than the AI generating and looking, the person is looking. So I could see a lot of value for it, but I do believe your key word there was lazy, right? And as humans, what do we want to give up, and what do we want to become useful to us? So there's a lot of value in it. I don't want to be negative by any means. I think teachers need to adopt this as a strategy. There's always been a percentage of an audience who cheats. I don't think that percentage is going to change. It might be easier to cheat with something like this product, but I don't think it's going to destroy the world. But the key is, how do we use it? Why are we using it? And even further, you could go to the companies themselves and say, why are you developing this as opposed to something else that might actually benefit us better? Is it just a toy? Or is it something that could be useful? There's a place for toys, obviously, but when it comes to city government, there's a lot of hardcore issues that need to be dealt with. And how can AI help us achieve those? And that, to me, again, is where research, even divisions in cities, need to start to develop, almost like a innovations group that can look at tech and start to make recommendations. One of the final things I'll say about that, though, is the delay that governments have as well. I think about Uber specifically. It was happening, right, in the US in particular, and there was all kinds of controversy. Toronto should have known, I'm using Toronto as an example, that it was going to come. They didn't. It came. 2 years later, they had some reconciliation of it. But this is a perfect example. So ChatGPT is another case here. How is that going to be used in the city? They should be on it right now. Every city should be on it right now, making some decisions around it. Do you want staff to use it or not?
Okay, thank you, Keith. We're getting close to the end of the hour, and I'm wondering if I could ask both of you to kind of make a closing comment or statement around AI and its relationship to open data. Ushnish, start with you.
So for me, this is the hardest one because it's an area where there's the biggest gap in what the values of government are and its practices. So every government municipality, for example, has some kind of social purchasing policy, whether it's super formal or not. So small things like meals will source it from suppliers which are owned by women or minorities or something like that. So that's a small example. Much more substantial example in the GTA. For infrastructure projects, there are community benefits agreements so that the local people get benefits from those communities. All those policies, social purchasing, local employment, go out the window when we're talking about technology, right? There is all kinds of problems with that data supply chain. And again, I'll stick in another link. So the economic models for these AI systems don't work without exploitation. So there's multiple forms, like the gathering of data, that first gathering of data, permissionless, right? Without any kind of permission, just scrape it, just like Clearview AI did, which was the problem, right? From the web, from Reddit, from wherever they can get it, right? The second layer is the link I put in, which is a bunch of reporting going on saying, hey, whenever there's labeling involved, there's moderation involved, content labeling. This is like it really, low paid task, and it's the only reason ChatGPT can be offered in this freemium model that we have, either free for some people or whatever it is, $30 a month, is because they're paying Kenyan workers $2 a month to label toxic content and moderate table toxic content, right? So if it was, they pay the workers a full wage, maybe it would cost $100 a month. Maybe you incorporate all these costs of gathering the data, labeling the data, paying proper fair wages for it. It'd be $1,000 a month, right? That nobody would pay for. But now it's being offered for $30 a month or for free because of that exploitation that takes place along that data chain, right? Along that supply chain of data, which a lot of people are becoming more conscious about. Hey, the food we eat, is it organic? Is it coming from farms where they do not exploit workers and so on? The clothes we wear, the same principles. Is it coming from a sweatshop?
Ushnish.
Yeah.
This conversation can go on for hours.
Anyway, I'll stop there. But all I'm saying is those principles of responsible sourcing are not being applied to data and AI at all.
Okay, Keith, you got a minute for your last final points.
Okay, I think one of the things that we used to say when I was working in the city of Toronto in the open data movement, and I think that still continues, is this idea, if it's already published on the web, it does exist, it could be scraped, it could be used. So why not release this data in an easier format? I think when you look at something like ChatGPT, right, it is sourcing what's on the internet. So it's an interesting standpoint from the idea of open data, remembering that what's published on the web, there's no graveyard, right? It doesn't really die. It exists. So that means all the work that you've done on your websites through things like Wayback Machine and so on exists and can be through these devices accessed. So I think it changes somewhat this idea of open data and thinking that we have to release it as data sets. That's the ideal, that's the dream. But now we've got things that can actually find your data and pop them into speeches and letters and, entrance exams and all those kind of things. I think it changes the game a little bit for open data.
Okay, Keith, that's awesome. And Ushnish, thank you very much. And I just commented before, I think this conversation is going to continue and likely to be included in our annual conference. And with that, I just have a slide up that talks about what's happening next with Go Open Data, our events. There's one on April the 4th on brewing open data, the standards approach, and then our conference on May the 4th and 5th. So with that, I want to thank everybody for their participation, and we look forward to any additional comments you might have. We'll be sending out maybe a poll to get some thoughts from you based on the discussion today. So again, thank you, everybody. And with that, we'll close off at 1:01 p.m. Thanks. Bye for now.
Bye for now. My pleasure.